We talked to NPC HKSAR Deputy Bernard Chan, who's currently serving as the convener of Hong Kong's Executive Council. He weighs in on the decision to improve the city's electoral system. Chan explains why the changes are crucial and how the Western media is framing this law in the wrong way as he sees it. Meanwhile, he's talking about the international business community's reaction, particularly those living in Hong Kong, their views as well. Let's listen in. The latest plan to improve the electoral system in Hong Kong. As a National People's Congress member yourself, how do you see the reasoning behind this?
I think it's quite obvious to the central government that there is an issue in the Hong Kong electoral development. Over the years, we have the system in Hong Kong, the electoral system, have advanced accordingly, but unfortunately, it has been completely hijacked away by some of the very radicals in Hong Kong. Given what happened to the social unrest in 2019, and then with the events that follow, I think it gives really no pleasure for the central government to step in to help Hong Kong to restore the law and order and try to protect Hong Kong's the whole democratic development.
Do you think this is in any way away from the one country, two system principle?
As a matter of fact, I think in the statement made by the central government, it repeated many times that they want to preserve and to sustain the development of the one country, two system. And I think that's exactly why they want to put in place this new arrangement, such that the original intent of the one country, two system will remain. Because after all, the two system can still flourish, but only under the one country. Unfortunately, the whole one country, two system was sort of misinterpreted by some, especially by those who have ill intention to turn it against the central government. So I think the only way for the one country, two system to continue is to have this correction at this point of time.
At this moment, you and your colleagues, the NPC deputies, are discussing the plan. How do you think that discussion is going on right now?
I would say that all the members of the delegates from Hong Kong supported the proposed improvement to the electoral reforms in Hong Kong. Now, of course, there could be different ways that we can do so by reshaping the way how the makeup of the Legislative Council to the way how we nominate the Chief Executive of Hong Kong. So many members, many delegates within the Hong Kong delegations presented their recommendations at the discussions. But the question is, of course, now we have to restore the confidence first. It was quite unfortunate that the entire democratic movement has been completely hijacked away by some of the radicals who wants to turn Hong Kong to a base to go against the central government.
Over the past year, since the security law is implemented, we have seen quite a dozen of the radicals that you talked about being arrested. What do you, as an NPC deputy, and also as someone in Hong Kong, not necessarily in the government, but so closely being in consultation with the government, make of the latest?
It's quite unfortunate most of the Western media, together with the Western critics, misunderstood the reason behind the arrest. They believe that this is our way to silence the opposition, but in fact it is not. I mean, clearly those people being arrested so far all have committed a crime. Now, however, Hong Kong still have a very independent judiciary process, so it's still under due process right now. It's completely unfair for the Western critics to say that the Hong Kong government intentionally try to silence so-called the protesters or opposition leaders. But they should also try to understand that it is, it's a law that we abided by in Hong Kong. So if they commit a crime, they will need to be arrested. But whether they will be sentenced, it will still be up to the very independent judiciary's proceeding in Hong Kong.
You're the non-official convener. Let me ask you, how do you work in your daily schedule with both the SAR government and the central authorities?
I have a very interesting background. I'm a businessman in finance, but I'm also a non-official member to the Executive Council in Hong Kong, which basically is the advisory body to the chief executive. Equally, of course, I'm being a Hong Kong person. I totally understand the working of the Hong Kong government, but because also I'm a businessman, and a businessman involving in international finance, so I get to understand also the perspective from investors to especially also Western or foreign investment investment arena. So I spend a lot of my time explaining to my Western counterpart in business, what is actually happening on the ground, because they only hear from their Western media sources, and which tends to be always be very biased to what actually is happening in Hong Kong.
Let's talk about some of these biases or misconceptions, Mr. Chen. One of it is whether the central authorities is destroying the one country, two system with the latest development, both the security law and also the improvement of the electoral system this time.
Among many of my Western friends or even my Western business counterparts, they are worried that the Chinese government are stepping in and taking all the control, taking all the authorities off from Hong Kong, and they worry about my businesses in Hong Kong. But I have to explain to them that's exactly the opposite what the central government is actually doing. In fact, I have to say in 2019, in the middle of the social unrest, I was very worried, because I was very worried that, if central government will continue to honor one country, two system, because what's happening to Hong Kong, it's completely out of control and it's a direct threat. It turns out that central government want desperately, just like myself, to preserve the one country, two systems. So they came out and repeatedly telling Hong Kong and telling the whole world that they want to make one country, two system to work.
Whether the electoral committee will have power so much so that it would overshadow the power and the responsibility of the Legislative Council. What do you make of that concern?
We have yet been told the exact details of the actual reform, the actual makeup of the membership to the Legislative Council. But I suspect that it will probably restore back to perhaps a more balanced approach to making sure that the Legislative Council is really being represented and not being, maybe being hijacked away for one purpose or one agenda type of thing. So it will be more diverse and more well represented. Now, we don't know the details yet. We will do to find out. And I suspect that, central government needs to make sure those being elected will observe and to respect the Constitution and the basic law.
We noticed that latest, Hong Kong has been taken off, so-called, from the Economic Freedom Index. Well, there are many different kinds of index to discuss in the economy. But this is just one of those examples that Hong Kong might be viewed very differently in the eyes of some international investors. Mr. Chan, what do you make of all of these latest development?
One country, two system is not a very easy explanation to the world, because it's never done anywhere else in the world. And I understand, some of these Western critics, especially those who never actually spend enough time in Hong Kong to understand that, will probably wrongly interpret So that is somewhat a typical Western narrative, but what they don't understand is what's actually happening in the ground. You know, we have our own trade negotiation, with all our bilateral counterparts. So, and we have the capital free flow, all the things that what Hong Kong has always have. And so business people continue to come to Hong Kong to set up offices. Some of them even thank central government to help to restore public confidence and law and order, which is so important for an international financial center to work.
Bernard Chan, as always, such a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Tianwei.